She walked into the ballroom believing she was there to change lives. She just didn't know it would be her own. Every chandelier sparkled, every glass clinked, and every smile hid something uglier than sin. Within minutes, laughter turned to whispers, and whispers turned into something far darker. They didn't see her as a guest or a partner or a human being. They saw her as a mistake that needed correcting. But what they didn't know was that the woman they mocked held the power to erase everything they owned. She thought she was attending a celebration. They were unknowingly hosting their downfall. What happened next would silence a room that had mocked her laughter minutes before. By all accounts, Alani Washington lived a life most could only dream of. Mornings began before sunrise, her calendar a battlefield of boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions. Yet beneath the sleek exterior of power, she carried something deeper, a quiet purpose shaped by years of being underestimated, dismissed, and told to wait her turn. Every success she built was a rebellion against the ceilings others swore she'd never break. On that winter evening, she wasn't just attending another gala. She was about to finalize a historic $5 billion merger that would transform an entire industry. It was supposed to be a night of unity, philanthropy, and celebration. She chose a simple white gown, elegant but unassuming, believing her presence would speak louder than any jewel ever could. But the moment she stepped into the glittering penthouse, the warmth she expected never came. The glances lingered too long. The smiles were thin, performative. She couldn't have known that the room she'd helped fund, the people she'd soon empower, were about to strip away every illusion of civility she thought existed. She was about to learn that wealth could buy luxury, but not humanity. What awaited her inside those gilded walls wasn't admiration or respect. It was a kind of cruelty money can't disguise. The evening air outside the penthouse bit sharply against Alani's skin, but the cold that truly stung came from something deeper, the kind that seeps in when you're not seen at all. From the moment she stepped from her car, the night began to unravel. The valet didn't take her keys. He redirected her to the service entrance without a glance. The security guard didn't greet her. He examined her invitation like a counterfeit, holding it up to the light as though her name itself was a lie. For nearly 2 hours, she stood outside that glittering tower of glass, her white gown dusted with snow, watching guests sweep past her, laughing, golden, untouchable. She watched men she negotiated million-dollar contracts with sail inside without so much as a question. She watched women whose charities her own foundation had secretly funded brush past, eyes sliding over her as though she were invisible. No one saw her as an equal. No one thought she belonged. When she was finally cleared to enter, the warmth inside didn't welcome her. It burned. The room shimmered with light and money. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and people gilded in diamonds. But every sparkle was a mirror reflecting one thing: exclusion. Heads turned as she entered. Conversations paused mid-sentence. The laughter faltered, then sharpened. In that silence, judgment filled the air like static before a storm. Eleanor Vancroft's gaze found her first. Sharp, assessing, cruelly curious. The matriarch of the empire whose name adorned the invitations, whose charities filled magazine covers, whose face was synonymous with class, looked at Alani as though she tracked mud across heaven's carpet. Within seconds, her expression shifted from confusion to contempt. And from that moment, Alani ceased to be a guest. She became an exhibit. Every movement she made drew whispers. When she approached the bartender hesitated, glancing toward Eleanor for approval. A subtle shake of the head. Denied. When she tried to take a seat, a socialite placed her clutch on the chair beside her, claiming it as reserved. A man in a velvet blazer muttered something under his breath, just loud enough for laughter to ripple nearby. The cruelty wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. It was quiet, coordinated, performed behind champagne smiles. A theater of power where humiliation was the entertainment of choice. Carter Vancroft, their son, embodied it perfectly, swaggering across the floor, glass in hand, drunk on both alcohol and privilege. His words slurred, but his intent was razor-sharp. He mimed a sweeping gesture toward Alani as if dusting something from his sleeve, earning a roar of laughter from his entourage. Blair, the daughter, recorded it all on her phone, her lips curling into the faintest, most poisonous smile. Still, Alani stood tall. She adjusted her gown, straightened her shoulders, and tried to remember why she'd come. To finalize a deal that would save his very family from financial ruin. They needed her far more than she needed them. But they didn't know that yet, and she wasn't about to tell them. Not yet. The orchestra struck up a waltz, and the guests twirled across the marble floor, their laughter spilling like champagne. Alani found herself near the edge of the crowd, invisible again, until Blair appeared beside her, flawless, radiant, and armed with malice disguised as grace. She offered Alani a glass of deep red wine, her smile sweet, her voice soft enough to feel like kindness. For the first time that night, Alani allowed herself a flicker of relief. Maybe, just maybe, decency still existed here. But as her fingers reached the glass, Blair's hand slipped. The wine cascaded in slow motion, red on white, staining the fabric of Alani's gown like a wound. Gasps turned into laughter. Cameras rose. Someone whispered, asterisk, she should really watch where she's going. Asterisk Alani stood frozen, drenched in the cold liquid, her body trembling. Not from humiliation, but from something far more dangerous, resolve. The room erupted in laughter. But beneath it all, a subtle shift began. The air grew heavy. The chandeliers shimmered dimmed. She bent down, gathered the folds of her ruined gown, and rose slowly. The laughter faltered. Her phone was already in her hand. They thought it was to record, or maybe to call for help. But Alani Washington didn't need help. She was a help, the kind that dismantles empires. As the final notes of the orchestra faded, she stood still in the center of the ballroom, the crowd's amusement dying under the weight of her silence. Every mocking voice, every cruel smirk, she memorized them all. And in that quiet, something shifted in her eyes, something that no one in that room recognized until it was far too late. Because behind those eyes wasn't a victim. It was a reckoning. They thought the show was over. But Alani Washington was only getting started. For a heartbeat, time stopped. The laughter froze mid-echo. The glimmer of the chandeliers fractured into cold shards of silence. Alani Washington stood in the center of that golden ballroom, her white gown now drenched in red, the color of humiliation and fury. Every eye was on her, mocking, sneering, waiting for her to crumble. But she didn't move. Not yet. The glass stem of the fallen wine goblet rolled to her feet and stopped. The crimson stain spread like a map, and she followed it with her gaze, tracing the trail of arrogance, cruelty, and centuries of entitlement condensed into one single moment. The room buzzed with nervous amusement. People whispering that she should apologize, that she should leave quietly, that she should know her place. But Alani didn't lower her head. She lifted her phone. Her thumb moved with the quiet precision of a woman who'd spent a lifetime building and dismantling fortunes with a single tap. Across the room, Harrison Bancroft frowned, confused, as he received an urgent notification on his watch. Then another. The investors, the reporters, the photographers. Everyone's phones began to vibrate in a growing chorus of dread. Screens lit up with breaking news alerts. Apex Stratos terminates Bancroft merger. Cites ethical misconduct. Within seconds, the news spread like wildfire. The $5 billion deal that was meant to save the Bancroft empire had just evaporated. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Eleanor's diamond hand flew to her chest. Carter's smirk cracked, confusion flooding his pale face. Blair's phone slipped from her hand, the screen splintering as it hit the marble. The family that just mocked her now stood paralyzed, watching their entire legacy dissolve before their eyes. And then it hit them, the name, the one flashing across every notification. Alani Washington, CEO of Apex Stratos. Asterisk, the silence that followed was deafening. You could hear the soft hum of the chandelier lights, the faint click of heels from someone backing away, the slow, suffocating collapse of illusion. Eleanor stammered something about mistake, her voice thin, desperate. But the truth hung heavy in the air, undeniable. They hadn't humiliated a stranger. They had destroyed themselves. Alani didn't need to speak. Her presence was louder than any speech could ever be. Every inch of that ballroom, the laughter, the wealth, the power, belonged to her now, if only because she had taken back control of the one thing they could never possess, dignity. Cameras, once used to mock her, now turned toward her in awe. The same lenses that had captured her humiliation now recorded her retribution. The same voices that whispered insults now whispered her name. She turned toward the Vancrofts, her expression unreadable, and for the first time they saw her not as an outsider, but as something far more terrifying, a reflection of their own decay. Outside the massive glass windows, the city glittered like a million watching eyes. Inside, the mighty had fallen. Harrison's phone rang, his financial advisor. Then another, his bank. One by one, his safety nets were vanishing. The empire his family had built over generations was collapsing in real time, and the woman they had called nothing had orchestrated it all with the quiet grace of justice, not vengeance. Eleanor's tears streaked through her makeup. Carter tried to laugh it off. Blair trembled, mascara smudging like the ruins of a mask. None of them dared step closer. Alani took one step forward, then another, until she stood face to face with a family that had mocked her. Her gaze was calm, almost merciful. Without a word, she handed her wine-stained phone to a nearby reporter and turned to leave. The cameras followed her as the great doors opened, her silhouette framed by the city lights. Every eye followed, every breath held. The echo of her heels on marble sounded less like retreat and more like a verdict. Behind her, the Vancrofts stood amid the wreckage of their own making, exposed, undone, and finally powerless. Because for the first time in their lives, money couldn't save them. But what Alani didn't know was that her silence would ignite something far bigger than revenge. It would spark a reckoning that the whole world would soon feel. The night ended in silence. No music, no laughter, only the slow collapse of a dynasty built on arrogance and inherited cruelty. By the next morning, the headlines were everywhere. Asterisk racist outburst ends $5 billion deal. Bancroft empire implodes after Gala scandal. Asterisk every news outlet, every social feed, every boardroom whispered the same name with awe and disbelief. Asterisk Alani Washington. Asterisk she didn't speak to the press. She didn't issue a statement. She didn't need to. Her silence became the story. The footage of her standing tall in that blood-red gown, dignified, calm, unbroken, spread across the world. To some, she was a mystery. To others, a mirror reflecting the ugly truth of power and prejudice. But to millions of women who had swallowed their dignity just to survive another day, she was proof that grace could be louder than rage. The Vancrofts disappeared from the spotlight as quickly as they had mocked her. Their empire crumbled under lawsuits, bankruptcies, and a storm of public shame. Charity boards revoked their memberships. Investors withdrew. The same society that once bowed before them now crossed the street to avoid their fall. For the first time, they tasted the humiliation they had so carelessly served others. And Alani? She went back to work. Quietly. Intentionally. Her company launched a new initiative, funding education and mentorship programs for young black entrepreneurs, the very people the system was built to overlook. She never mentioned that night again, but those who were there would never forget it. The night the world learned that wealth without humanity is worthless. Because what happened in that ballroom wasn't just about one woman being disrespected. It was about every door that has ever been closed, every assumption ever made, every moment someone was told they didn't belong. It was about the cost of ignorance and the quiet power of knowing your worth even when others refuse to see it. Racism doesn't always scream. It often smiles, sips champagne, and calls itself civilized. But sometimes all it takes is one person refusing to shrink, refusing to play small, to remind the world what true power looks like. So the question isn't whether Alani Washington won that night, because she did. The question is, how many more stories like hers will it take before we stop pretending not to see? Because respect shouldn't be earned by wealth or demanded by fear. It should be the starting point, the bare minimum for every human being. And until that truth is lived, not just spoken, stories like this one will keep repeating until someone else, somewhere decides, asterisk enough, asterisk.